Hello, and welcome to the Safety Brief, your weekly dose of real talk on cybersecurity, tech trends, and how to stay secure in a rapidly changing world. I'm your host, Elizabeth, and the topic for today is surveillance tech in the modern workplace. From keystroke loggers to camera systems and even AI-powered monitoring tools, surveillance is no longer just for high security vaults. It's in your office, on your laptops, and maybe in your home workspace. So let's dig into it. To start us off, what types of surveillance technologies are companies using today, and how widespread is their use?
More widespread than you would think, and a lot of them are very questionable.
Yeah, I think to start us off here, I think we need to define surveillance
Hmm.
and why companies may engage and do engage in certain activities. And this is not a blanket statement or a topic, as in every company is doing this and everything we're going to talk about, every company is doing. But if we'll put ourselves in the seat of the business owner, we'll go a mile in their shoes, and we'll say, you've poured your life blood, sweat, and tears into this thing that you've built, and obviously you want to set up safeguards and protection mechanisms of it, right? And so, when we look at surveillance or even compliance-based controls when it comes to cybersecurity, or just more so deployed to a computer or even a VoIP system like a voice over IP and internet phone system, I think it's going to try to fine line between what we can consider surveillance slash compliance slash accountability controls. I'll give
Yeah.
you one example. We last place I worked also had a lot of people remote, and there was a kind of dilemma where not everybody had like the ticketing queue board up in front of them at all times, and so there were some missed tickets, there were some missed calls, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we did is we ran a group policy that would launch that ticketing dashboard if it wasn't open every hour or so, right? And so the surveillance is that dashboard already open? If not, open it, right? And so I think there's certain automations here that are going to be beneficial, but I think surveillance, as far as the definition goes, is really accountability measures companies put in place to protect their assets and revenue stream. And now, can certain companies maybe uh, do some of this without user consent or making their users aware? Yeah, that's where we start getting into some hot water, like we were talking about last week with AI note takers and chat bots type of things. And so I think the biggest thing is going to be consent culture needs to be emphasized here throughout the whole course of this. Is the business responsible for protecting its revenue streams? Yes. Is accountability needed? Because not every employee may act in the best interest of the business. Yes, absolutely. But I think, what Matt's getting at and what the topic's getting at is, hey, um, you know, especially if you work from home, uh, those that use a network connected device in their own home are not going to use it to the same hygiene level as they would if they were in an office space. And that's just a fact.
Mhm.
That's not like that's not an opinion. That's a fact. So I think that's kind of what we're unpacking today is, hey, what are some of the controls that companies should and ought to have to protect their interests, and then what are maybe some things that are commonly out there that companies maybe aren't cluing users into, and there's a topic to be debated here whether or not they have to or should inform their users fully or not. And so I think that's what we're going to unpack.
Yeah, there's a lot of visibility now from a business standpoint. How do these tools actually help improve workplace security or productivity? And to your point, what tools would you recommend to help the workplace security and productivity?
You need to have DLP, some form of DLP, so that you can have policies in place that will prevent the extrication of data off of machines, either via the network or more commonly, USB flash drive. That's one of the biggest things that you will run into, and that's where you will find data leakage is going to be extremely common. Um, it is worth noting that no matter how much you put in place software wise, there is no way that you can restrict what a person has in their mind. And
Hmm.
so, this is, well, until Elon gets the little brain thingy working a little bit more, we can DLP our brains. So, there you go. But that is something that has to be considered. We focus on trying to limit what can be done on a physical device, but we forget that some people have an extremely insane memory, and anything that they see, I mean, I'm talking like perfect recall memory.
Photographic memory. I have a
Yep.
friend with it, and I'm so jealous. Didn't have
Yep.
to study a lick of anything in school.
Photographic memory is extremely good, but it's extremely dangerous because, a person ends up leaving a role and they're able to remember everything that they had.
Hmm.
Now, even somebody who doesn't have, a photographic memory or perfect recall or any of that stuff, if they leave, they go to a new company, you know, say they're in sales, they're going to remember people they worked with that they want to continue working with. And they could try to leverage that and bring them over to said new company. There's no way that you can really, I mean, you can put policies in place, but if a person leaves, they're not really bound by your policies anymore. They're bound by their own ethics and their own morals. But we've seen where sometimes those can get a little bit
Wonky.
gray. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, within the scope of the services we offer, and just to be 100% transparent, we are not a surveillance company or a cybersecurity company. We are not how do you say, private investigators for your cyber needs. We're a prevention shop, prevention as a service. And so what one example that we have is we're able to monitor, it's called Shadow IT, and we're able to monitor what applications may be actively utilized by users, or at least applications that they're getting email correspondence from, which means maybe they have an account, maybe they got signed up for some trial. Regardless, they're getting email from these platforms. And an example that I could speak to that we've seen recently is if a business goes through the due diligence and says, hey, in order to minimize our attack surface and harden up what we do, we're going to standardize on a single file sharing platform. We are going to use Microsoft OneDrive, right? We'll just say that. And so what may be important for that organization is to monitor uses of file sharing platforms that are not Microsoft OneDrive, because they've gone through the effort to say, hey, this is what we're going to standardize on. That's that, right? And there's reasons behind that. There's a strategic team responsible for making that decision. There's reasons for that decision. And so where we have the capability to monitor that kind of activity is, again, it's monitoring, surveillance. It's they each have their own undertones, but what we're able to do is, hey, we see the use of WeTransfer, which is commonly used in malicious file transfer or file exfiltration or whatever. It doesn't mean it's bad. Doesn't mean the use of it's bad. It's just it's commonly weaponized. And so that kind of visibility is helpful if the company's gone through that due diligence and say, hey, this is what we're going to standardize on. This is what we're going to use. And it's not as if the usage of a different platform is, like I said, an immediate sign of a breach, but is it introducing unnecessary risk to that environment? And again, this is where I come back to the thematic, kind of overarching narrative that there are proper controls businesses should employ for monitoring / surveillance to protect their revenue streams and mitigate risk. And so, again, it's going to come back to what are those monitoring controls? What are the ethical boundaries? Where do those controls start and stop? Are they deployed to employee phones, right? Or just company assets? And then you get people working from home, and then that gets into a whole different, not black and white discussion, right? And so, but I think ultimately there are practical examples and ways within cybersecurity to deploy these mechanisms. There are appropriate uses, ethical uses of these, but
Filtering. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And again, some surveillance, some monitoring controls are merely informational, right? Are
Hmm.
our users going to Netflix on their lunch break, right? Like how much of the network's being consumed by that? Is it slowing down anybody else on the network, etc.? Or is it monitored and blocked? And that's another piece too, is like, hey, are we monitoring certain, like if you use an enterprise chat system, is that chat monitored, or is that chat monitored and moderated? And that's the
Mm-hmm.
difference, right? Like the constant is probably monitored pretty consistently for good reason, but is it moderated or not? And then that's where users can think that, hey, I've said some wild things in emails, I've said some wild things in chat, I haven't really gotten talked to, and hey, again, that could just be a monitoring only control in the event that there's a complaint or there's a harassment case or something happens both into the organization or out of the organization. This is why it's really important that these companies have these types of controls. But again, it always comes back to that fine line between what data are we collecting from our employees, and what data are we collecting in order to preserve the best interest of the business.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm glad that you brought up the Netflix thing, because the example that I was going to bring up is when I was in the SOC, I saw a lot of anti-cheat files
Right.
being downloaded. And that's something to where you could be notified and then you can take action to make it to where all that is blocked. So they will not be gaming on the clock or on your
Right.
network. But I think this is where it gets a little tricky, is where's the fine line between business needs and employee privacy? How are workers typically notified, or are they not notified that they're being monitored?
Most cases, they're not going to be notified. I can say that how to say this without identifying anybody? Screw it.
Acne.
No,
Acne
no,
company.
no. When I was at a former company, there were detections that we picked up that unfortunately were from a very grayware monitoring solution. It monitored everything that was typed. It took snapshots of their desktop at random, or so they said
Oof.
was random, but it was taking snapshots roughly every 5 seconds to see what was on their screens. It had the capability to integrate into their phone system and was able to monitor anything that they said or did on the phones. It was very intrusive, and none of the employees were ever notified that it existed. When we ran, or the only reason we found out that it was there was because it was having conflicts with one of the solutions that we had in place. When it was brought up, it was instantly said, this cannot be told to any of the employees. The
So,
name of the program that you are seeing has to be removed, and there can be no reference to it in any of the logging or ticketing that you put into your side. Now, mind you, these guys that we were working with were developing things that fly and go boom. So there was a lot of security around what they were actually working on, and there was a justifiable reason that they were wanting to be that crazy with the security solution.
Right.
But in most cases, when there is a security solution that is installed on machines, they don't necessarily tell the employees, because you don't want to have them find alternate methods of doing what they're
Subverting
in.
those controls.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The difference being, when you work on a help desk, and I have experience managing a help desk, there are numerous utilities that are on machines and the employees know about them. um, One of the most common things is, they will monitor your calls for quality assurance. That's a lie. It's not for quality assurance. It's to punish the people that they're listening to. Just throwing that out there from experience. They don't care what the customer says. They care very much if you say the wrong word when you're talking to the customer, though. So they will let you know that that kind of solution exists on your system, and you'll notice that when people know that's there, they tailor how they talk when they are near their machine,
yeah.
because that a little unknown spoiler here is, it doesn't just listen when you're on a phone. It can listen the entire time. Even if you have a person on hold or if you disconnect and call them back, it's listening the entire time. So telling people that something's there, telling them that or not telling them that it's there, it alters their behaviors. Sometimes that's what you want. You want people to be super nice and, professional and everything else. I mean, that's what you should be anyways, but sometimes it takes a little bit of a nudge to get people going that direction. Other times you're building giant things that fly in the sky and go boom, and you don't want people to know that you are monitoring them because you're trying to catch traitors in the act,
Hmm.
which honestly is kind of cool, but also terrifying, knowing that there's a large enough market out there that they are kind of quietly monitoring this to catch them.
No, I think something to keep in mind is, or what I keep in mind when I'm on any kind of work endpoint is just imagine your boss is standing behind you. Kind of like when I was growing up, my father would always say, would you do it in front of your grandma? Or would you say that in front of your grandma? Same thing. If you're on your work endpoint, think to yourself, if my boss was standing behind me and watching what I was doing or saying, would they be okay with it? And if the answer is gray or questionable, don't do it on your work endpoint, do it on your personal. Now, let's flip the script a little bit here. Can surveillance tools themselves become a cybersecurity risk? And what happens if these systems are misconfigured or exploited?
Yeah, most definitely. And we see this in what's commonly referred to as supply chain attacks
Hmm.
in the realm of IT support and cybersecurity. Is that there are some really, really handy tools that IT professionals use every single day to make their service more scalable. They can get in, remote in, help the user out, get the user back to work pretty easily. But those kinds of tools are immensely powerful in the wrong hands, and thus why it's called supply chain. And so, if you're looking at the primary aim of surveillance or monitoring tools being gathering a lot of data, then a threat actor with access to such data can craft a really, really, really just surgical type of attack and carry it out. And so I think especially if you're able to get access to a system and see a certain process running that you can masquerade as and kind of not get detected as easily. And it's like, oh yeah, no, that's our endpoint security platform. That's our EDR, right? Whatever it is,
Yeah.
that agent we know, we deploy, we do it for a reason. And so I think, again, and there's certainly, you talk about cybersecurity risks. There's something called Pegasus out there that's used in a much more militarized and governmental and highly controversial fashion because it has incredible access to surveil and monitor without any install or download or all these things, right? And so again, the difficulty for cyber practitioners is, number one, do we have an accurate inventory of all the tools we deploy, and have we hardened not just the tools themselves but the access to such tools? And I think that's often an afterthought is, hey, I am trying to protect a third party system, not my computer, not the server I administer, but this user's machine. And all the effort, energy, and mental focus goes on those machines or those computers that we often forget. I'm using an 8-character password to get into this console, like things like that, right? And so I think, again, if you deploy these tools, that data is sitting somewhere. The next question is, where does that data live and who has access to it? Is it self-hosted? Is it cloud-hosted? Now we're getting back into deja vu of last week about, where that
Hmm.
data could go and how it could be weaponized. But I think, you know, anything. I mean, IoT, the smart fridge in the break room, an Echo Dot, it could be a cybersecurity risk and is a cybersecurity risk to a degree, if not properly configured or segmented. And so, again, are companies in their best interest deploying these surveillance tools for sure? But, there's, again, very similar to last week's discussion, there is an ethical aim of this, of what is right, and then there is a security risk of how do I properly harden this thing, and it's almost identical with this topic this week.
Yeah, I think another important thing to keep top of mind is different sectors like finance or healthcare, where data sensitivity is sky high. Do they handle surveillance differently? Any standout best practices? I think it's going to fall back to that data protection, where the data is being stored, how it's being stored. Like Mike said, any others stand out? Best practices that anyone under any kind of compliance would fall under?
I mean, where these tools are based out of and where they're developed and country of origin are going to be very, very big talking points for obvious reasons. Not just in 2025, but this is the case for hundreds of years as our country's developed, is where we source certain security controls and why it's important for Blockworks to staff everyone here nationally in the United States, and the tools we use and the data that they obviously generate. We need to be stored here in the United States, and so accountability of where that data is and how that platform is developed and secured is obviously important. But I think it is one thing. It's funny, I got into a really good discussion for the nerds on this stream we're catching afterwards. I'm in the market for a 3D printer. All right, so I'm at that point, right? I feel like every dad, it's inevitable, right? You either get a big flat screen TV and a sound bar, or you go down the 3D printing rabbit hole, and some of you do both. That's fine. But I've been researching all these brands, and one specifically, which will not be named, it touts a lot of really high functionality, and it's great, but its country of origin is very suspect, and its accessibility and how easy it is to use is also it's an appealing thing to consumers, right? It has a lot of value and benefit, and the cost per dollar, or the value per dollar, is immense, right? It's wow, this is a great deal. I could do a lot with this specific printer. But the difficulty with this is, how is that cost offset when the same printer doing the same thing is often, either internationally or nationally, $2,000-$3,000, and this one's $500 to $700. And you got to ask yourself, hey, are the developers of this thing, surveillance tool, 3D printer, whatever it is, are they offsetting that cost to drive it into the market, either consumer or business, in order to then have, hey, all that data's got that's worth money. That's worth big money, And again, nobody reads these T's and C's, these terms and conditions. We've talked about this time and time again. But I think, again, country of origin, developer, software developer, and look for shell companies that are US based. We talk about this whenever you go to download a game on your phone, either on the Google Play Store or the iOS App Store. Look at the publishing company of that app, and then look at who owns that company, right? It's often, they bought a P.O. box in Seattle or Florida or whatever, and they're based here. But guess what? Someone's paying that rent and they don't live here. And so, I think, again, just really, really high amounts of due diligence when you're exploring, hey, I really do want to deploy monitoring / security controls to my company for good reason. Again, that's the theme here, for good reason. But make sure you are, really, really doing the due diligence and the research of background checking those companies that are developing the software, administering the software, and storing that data. Because if it's cheap, and it's especially if it's significantly cheaper than a lot of other solutions, you're on thin ice. There's a reason for that, right? If 12 companies are selling something for around the same price, and one company's selling it steeply lower, what do they just have, a gold mine of that product, or you know what I mean? So all businesses run the same way. They all got to generate revenue. So if they're not getting the revenue from there, you're getting it from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you kind of hit the next question on the head, and that's, to close this off, is what businesses should be considering before rolling out monitoring tech. What should they be thinking about first? Are there any red flags or must-haves? So Mike, you kind of hit the head on that one. Matt, anything from you on that one?
You have to consider your employees as well. That's the biggest thing. I don't know anybody that wants to go to work and feel like they're in a nation state.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And even more so, I can tell you that When I was starting out, I worked at a company where they did some extreme levels of monitoring for absolutely no reason at all. We did not do anything important. Uh, we did almost nothing at all. We were so understaffed and undertrained that we couldn't even do the basics. So the monitoring was excessive. Um, when the monitoring was found out, because the first time manager that was over top of our group opened their mouth and told everybody that they were monitoring everything and that they had screenshots, it basically changed the way that everybody worked. Nobody wanted to say anything, nobody wanted to do anything. Everybody was paranoid because they didn't know, what if they have listening devices throughout the office? And that's not far off. There are organizations that do have solutions like that set up because they understand that they are monitoring the desktop, but people are going to go different places in the office and they're going to have conversations. So being able to pick up those conversations gives them even further insight. So you just have to understand that the level of security and the level of monitoring that you are putting in place can and does have an impact on your employees overall. And while there may be some less than good employees with terrible motives, the bulk of them are just there to do their stuff and go home. They're
Yeah.
not trying to sell nation secrets. They're not trying to get data and then sell it on the black market. Um, they're literally there to do their job, feed their family, go home, and do it all again the next day. So you just have to be cognizant of that and figure out a way to balance that. If you absolutely positively have to have a solution in place where it where you're not letting them know and it's doing some form of logging, if somebody finds out about it, don't give them the doom and gloom speech. Be a little bit more understanding and explain the reasoning as to why it has to be on there, not just, well, that's the way it is and that's because we said so. No,
Hmm.
well, that's great, but that means that employee is going to go bye-bye and tell everybody that they know exactly what the company had on machines, and you're going to have a harder time getting employees to come in the door at that point.
Right.
Other than that, what Mike was saying, data storage is a very huge concern. If you are going to use, I don't know, any kind of a security camera system, where is that data going to be located? Are you going to house it locally? Are you going to house it in the cloud? If you're housing it in the cloud, what company are you using? If for say, and I'm just throwing this out there, you are a company that is operating over in the EU and you choose a company from the United States as your security solution provider for doing video monitoring, you have to look and make sure that that data is not being housed outside of the EU. Otherwise, you could be in violation of GDPR. So there's so many subtleties and nuances that you have to look at with how each solution is operating. Where's the data going to be? What's it doing on the back end? What level of access does it have? You talked about it earlier. If you go in there and you get access to these systems, say it does have the ability to take screenshots of desktops, say it does log everything that's being done. That's a wealth of information that you just made a threat actor's life infinitely easier.
It's a lot of data. Everything
Yeah,
you survey, everything you monitor is being collected and can be used against you,
but here's the
whether
other
it's
thing
from the
about that.
company or an attacker. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. So if you don't have a need to have huge amounts of surveillance or monitoring,
Mhm.
don't have it in place because then you're just adding more data for them to extract, like Matt was saying.
But you're also, not only are you theoretically risking your company, your employees, and them getting access to your stuff, the more that you're logging and the more that they have access to, they now know all of your customers. They now have theoretically video and or audio logs of conversations with those customers. I mean, if you have the audio
That's
and
recon.
you've got 10 minutes you got yourself a pretty damn nice deep fake. Just saying. You could then, I mean, somebody can literally use the data that you have that you think that you have to have for your monitoring purposes to attack your customers. That's not a good thing.
I
That's
will
never a
say,
good thing.
I have created a pretty proficient deepfake with less than 5 minutes of my own audio. And obviously, it sounds just a tad different. It's just the articulation.
Mm-hmm.
However, obviously, the longer you go with that audio, the more proficient it gets, the more robotic or less robotic it sounds. But yeah, 5 minutes, I was able to make a copy of my voice.
Yep. So
It's pretty crazy.
all those are concerns that you've got to think about. Like, I hate to be it. I'm not trying to be the doom and gloom guy, but I end up being that way because that's what
You love being the Duke.
I
Yes,
love
you
being the
do.
doom and gloom.
You were made for
What
that.
can I
Someone's got to
say?
say it, right? Someone's
You
got
were
to bring it
made for
up.
that.
I could come on here being the happiest person in the world, and you know what? Different
Be way
mask,
less
same
fun.
task.
Way less fun.
Yeah,
It
that's
would
true.
be way less fun. Yeah,
That's true.
I think it's just important to build a culture of trust while protecting assets and monitoring responsibly. Well, that's a wrap on today's episode of the Safety Brief. Thank you, Mike and Matt, for joining and sharing your insights. Surveillance is a powerful tool, but with great power comes great responsibility. Don't forget to tune in next week for more cybersecurity insights on the Safety Brief. And as always, stay frosty.
Thanks all.